Thank you very much. It's good to be here. You can turn that down a little bit. I wanted to mention a book I wrote. People wonder why I wrote this book, God in Eisenhower's Life, Military Career, and Presidency. And you might wonder what that has to do with creation. Well, I'll summarize the book in one sentence. The war, World War II, is basically a war between creation and evolution, and the creationists won. Really. And I document that in this book in detail. When I talk about this, I keep saying I've been working on this for 50 years, and my wife says, oh, you haven't been working on this for 50 years. Actually, I've been working on it longer than 50 years. So it's the only book that deals with his religious values, etc., and how important creation was versus evolution. And if evolutionists would have won, we now would all be probably, if you'd still be here, be speaking German. Is das good? Is das sehr good? Nicht? Nein, good? It's what. So anyways, it's an interesting book. By the way, I had sent 4 books here, 4 boxes, sorry, large boxes of books, and 3 of them didn't make it. No one seems to know where they're at. Pardon? And so the one made it. The other 3 didn't. And so hopefully I won't run out, but I'm sure I will. Every time I go and speak, I run out. So I thought this time I won't run out. Well, guess what happened? 3 of them are somewhere around. And the post office said they would try to find them and let me know, but they've never, I called them like 4 times today and they never got back to me. So anyways, I prepared this when I was working for ICR, so you see the ICR logo on there. But this basically talks about evolution's blunders, frauds, and forgeries, which is what my book covers. And I have another one, volume 2, coming out. There were so many blunders, frauds, and forgeries, I had to make a volume 2. So I have some of the worst blunders of evolutionary history. People wonder when you talk about this, so what? Why? Who cares about evolution? Things will go on pretty much the way they are without believing in one or the other. Well, indeed, evolution has caused some tragedies in history, and I try to cover just a few of them in this book and my other book, which should be out soon. Okay, moving along. Get this working. Okay, the cases I review here are really not controversial. I relied heavily upon the peer-reviewed professional literature. It's there. You don't have to read creation literature to find out about this. You can read the evolution literature and it is there. And the evidence is very clear. Darwinists have been proven wrong by the evidence. And the problem is it's difficult to get people to look at the evidence. My grandson now is an 11th grader and he learned all about evolution in his class. And I tried to talk to him one day about that, and he brings out, gee, what did you learn? He said, well, we learned we've got all these organs in the human body that have no function, like the appendix and the tonsils, they're useless. And I thought, oh no. And then he talked about the fossil record, and he talked about how does mutation work? How does, evolution work? Evolution works by mutations. So we are, he summarizes, the result of billions of mistakes called mutations. And that's where we came from. And I thought, is that rational? We know that the vast majority of mutations are harmful. He's an A student. Yes, he said, but some are beneficial. And we are the result of those beneficial mutations. But if you think about it, if 99% are harmful or near neutral, that is going to swamp the positive mutations if there is any. Now there is some which I have a whole lecture on, but there is not very many that are clearly positive. And so we cover in this lecture a small amount of the evidence that is used to advance evolution, which has now been debunked. All of the evidence used to support evolution has now been carefully and thoroughly debunked by many of us who look at the literature. And when I talked to my grandson about this, I said, why don't you look at the other side? He says, well, why? He said, then, well, what is the other side? And that's what he asked me. And I said, well, God. Because mutations don't explain it. Natural selection's got to have something to select from. There has to be genetic variances, which evolution, mutations, etc., which natural selection can select. And since most are harmful, where's the evidence? And he said, well, he asked me, what is the evidence? What is your explanation? I said, well, God. And he said, well, who created God? And you probably heard this. And it's pretty clear that his teacher was tactfully trying to indoctrinate the kids in atheism. And I said, well, Christians, Muslims, and Jews have always believed that God always was. You have to have something. It's called infinite regression. You go back so far and you have to have some explanation. And of course, what do evolutionists talk about? The most common explanation now, although there are others, but the most common explanation by our friend who just died shortly, and he basically is one of the most famous cosmologists that ever lived. He's buried, by the way, in Westminster Abbey in England, next to Charles Darwin. On the other side is Isaac Newton. And you know who I'm talking about. And he has a book which he talks about the big questions. And one of the big questions is, where does everything come from? And he says, everything came from nothing. It is the ultimate free lunch. In the beginning was no time, no space, no matter. Okay? And the Big Bang produced time, space, matter, and energy. There we go. And those came from nothing. Well, I guess that's one explanation, but to me it's more logical to assume that those things, time, matter, space, and energy, came from a creator, a God. And that's why we accept the theological explanation. I guess your choice is God or nothing. So pick your choice, God or nothing. Okay, C.S. Lewis poem, and this is a good example of I have a whole bunch of C.S. Lewis books, but they got lost in the transit somewhere. But people wonder, why write a book about C.S. Lewis? He was strongly opposed to evolution. He was a militant anti-Darwinist. But he had to be careful because his field was not science, and he found quickly he couldn't deal very well with scientists about science. So he wrote poems instead. And his poems, if you think about it, have a lot of meaning. And just think about this. This is one of his poems. Lead us, evolution, lead us. Up the future's endless stair. Chop us, change us, prod us, weed us. That's evolution, right? And that's what it teaches. For stagnation is despair. Groping, guessing, yet progressing. Lead us, nobody knows to where. I mean, I think that's profound. I'm not much into poetry at all. But I read this and I became a fan of poetry. I mean, he really has a lot of insight there, a lot of wisdom. And so much of what he said has a lot of wisdom. Hopefully, if the post office can find my books, which were sent 3 weeks ago, by the way, you can have them. They'll bring in next week, and then you can pick them up. And that's the book here which I'm talking about, Evolutions, Blunders, Frauds, and Forgeries. And there are other books. This is one by Randy, my friend Randy Galusa, and he talks about evolution's blunders, and he talks about some of the same ones. And there, in case you're not sure what evolution is, you can see there, we start out with a fish, and we progress until we get up to the apes, and then primitive man, and then modern man. So just to remind you, that's what evolution is. And evolution is based on mutations. And we actually have a lot of knowledge about mutations. In fact, not too long ago, they were mutating fruit flies, because no one gets upset about that. And you can keep them in petri dishes. And Mueller was doing this about 100 years ago. And he found if you mutate fruit flies that you get a lot of amazing changes. You get different colors, you get bar-eyed, you get wingless, you get sepia-eyed, etc. But he found in mutating millions of fruit flies for 20 years, you never get anything better. All you get is a bunch of weird fruit flies. Actually, what you get most of the time is a bunch of dead fruit flies. These are the ones who are lucky that lived. But in the wild, these guys aren't going to do very well. The wingless, they do fine in the lab, because it's the lab prep guy feeds them, so they're fed like a dog. But in the wild, they're not going to survive very long. And then this was a experiment they did, and this was Bathybius, Haeckel, and Eosin. And these basically were the transmission of non-life to life. And this is one example. There you can see a picture of it. And this was touted for years as, indeed, this is the beginning of life. And then someone decided to look at it more carefully and found it was nothing more than some well, here, I'll show you. Those were pictures okay, I'll finish talking about this, that these indeed were precipitations, and the precipitations produced kind of a funny-like sets of behaviors you can see, but it's not life, it's not anything close to life, and it turned out to be wrong. And I have a whole chapter on that. And Haeckel, the guy who came up with a lot of these discoveries, he drew pictures, and he was clearly an incredibly good artist. And so when we talk about Haeckel's embryos, his frauds in that area, we can see that it wasn't because of lack of talent. It's because they were deliberately forged. And there is Professor Ernst Haeckel. You can see him as a young man in the one picture, and then you can see him as he grew older in the other picture. He was a well-known German biologist, and he was very important for his discoveries. He did discover a number of animals and name them, and he also was able to influence a young man called Adolf Hitler, as well as other people. Pasteur, this is Louis Pasteur, and he discovered that indeed you only get life from life. And he was one of the important people who managed to destroy the idea of spontaneous generation. He showed indeed life will never spontaneously generate. And he fought for many years trying to show life does not spontaneously generate from anything else. Life only comes from life. His motivation for that, as you may know, he was a creationist. And he believed the creation story said only life comes from life, period. No other source. And this eozoan, some of these slides I moved around, but this was once believed to be the source of all organic life, and it was a link between inorganic and organic life, and that is a bridge they've never been able to bridge. How in the world do you get from inorganic life? Such a thing doesn't exist, does it? So how do you get from inorganic molecules to life? Because life is organic, it is not, cannot be inorganic. So there's no such thing as inorganic life as we know now. And this right here is a precipitate. You can see you've got some solution here, and when you add another chemical, it causes a reaction in the test tube, and the reaction is not soluble, so it precipitates out of the solution and settles on the bottom. And that's what several of these discoveries they made were, they found later on. They thought life was forming. This is probably the most well-known fraud in history, Hesperopithecus, and this was an ape, and you can see him, not only him, but he got his wife back here, and you've got some camels and some other creatures, and they found this was based on a pig's tooth. And it's very well known. I have a whole chapter on it, very well documented. Now you might say it really is stupid to conclude a pig's tooth is a human. Well, actually it's not that dumb, because pig's teeth and human teeth are really very similar. So it may sound stupid, but it wasn't that stupid, but you still need to be more careful, especially building an entire man and giving it a name based on a tooth. And here you can see the tooth, there it is, and they've got the several parts. And here you can see an article in the leading science magazine in the world called Science, and this magazine basically talks about Hesperopithecus, the first anthropoid primate found in America, based on a tooth. And when you read these articles, and there are many in major science magazines, you can see how they knew so much about him. I mean, they had his wife and they had his family and so much information about him, which now when you read it is really, really foolish. It sounds foolish. And another example, this is in another magazine, this in Paleontology. This is by Dr. Osborne, who was the head of the American Museum of Natural History for a number of years. And this is Evolution, a summary of it, and this is done by Haeckel. Haeckel was a good artist, and basically he looked at the lineage, and you can see we start out with a cell, and as we go through the lineage we somehow end up with a kangaroo. And that was in our, according to Haeckel, that was in our evolutionary history, a kangaroo. And you can see it, you know, little kids, they jump around a lot. Well, might explain what's going on. And then we go up to modern man, and There we are. And this is Peccary, a New World pig. And the tooth actually was from a type of pig called a Peccary. And so it was one of many types of pigs. Kind of an ugly creature, I thought, but I guess some people like them. There you can see Peccary. Now this is more controversial. In fact, today there are researchers who are still trying to do this. They want to breed Negroes and apes. And I have several books which talk about the racism in evolution, and it clearly is there because for evolution to occur there has to be differences, right? If we're all identical, evolution can occur. There has to be differences. And therefore we have different races. The weaker races die off, the superior races excel, and that's evolution. So if all the races are equal, there can't be any evolution. There has to be some differences which affect survival. And Ivanovich, who was the first person to attempt to create a human-chimp hybrid by artificial insemination. And he outlined his idea in 1910 to the World Congress of Zoologists in Graz. And then he carried out experiments, carried out quite a few experiments to try to breed a ape human called a Himanzi. And now we see this today as nuts. Well, researchers are still trying to do this. Okay? It failed, obviously. In fact, we're not sure of all the experiments he did. We know, though, that he wanted to use Negroes because Negroes, he felt back then, were closer to apes and therefore he'd have a better chance of succeeding in this experiment. Again, showing how racist it was. In 1929, he organized a set of experiments involving ape sperm and humans. And again, he tried to do this, breed this, but it didn't work. There you can see Ivanovich. He was actually one of the leading breeders in Russia. He was world famous at that time, and he was very successful in breeding horses, etc. And he thought, well, one way, and they made it very clear, one way of proving evolution is to breed a human and an ape. That would be the clincher. In fact, his work was supported by many atheist societies in America and elsewhere. And of course, the Soviet government at that time was very supportive, so they supported his work. And he went to Africa, actually, and ironically, he went to a German state in Africa, and they said, now we're trying to help these people, we don't want any problems, so you can't tell them what you're doing. So you have to tell the women you're just giving them a gynecological exam. So don't tell them what you're doing. And I'm amazed that Germany back then was that concerned. Well, a few years later, of course, they were not. Professor Barish, he concluded, it's by no means unlikely that hybrid combining a human being and a chimpanzee could be produced in the laboratory. Now you might say, well, yeah, 1920, 1930. This was an article in a 2018 journal. So we're not talking about 30 years ago. We're talking about last year. And after all, he said, and this amazed me, after all, human and chimp share by most estimates roughly 99% of the nuclear DNA. And I thought, how could someone say this? The best estimate is 85%. That means 15% difference. So 15% of 3 billion would be what? A lot. So there's a huge difference between us genetically and apes. Enormous difference between the two. In fact, some chromosomes, like the Y, is even greater difference than that 85%. That's just the average between all the chromosomes. Now, will they carry that out? I don't know, but it's interesting that someone proposed it. And Barish, by the way, is a well-known psychologist. He's done a lot of work. His books sell really well, even better than mine, I have to admit. Although maybe we'll change that. There's the future. They're already talking about, if we do this, do they have civil rights? Do we have to use affirmative action programs for these humanzees, these ape-chimp combinations, these ape-chimp-human combinations? And there you go. Okay? The racism among evolution, I've written quite a bit on that, and it's really horrendous. One of the major reasons for racism was based on evolution. And this is one of Haeckel's books, and you can see he's got a, looks like a chimp, a gorilla, and orangutan, and a Negro. Except he has a German word, just N-E-G-E-R, Neger, I guess, to be pronounced. But Anyways, now he didn't say anything. This is the frontispiece of the book. But when you look at that, what does it say? This is the human family. And when we look at World War II and, of course, what happened in Germany, you can see the fruits were building up to what happened in Germany. Hitler didn't come out of nowhere and come up with these ideas. Hitler based his ideas heavily, and I cover that in my book on Hitler. Hitler based his ideas heavily on the professors. And we know the books he read, the evolutionary books he read. And he read them carefully, and he marked them up, and you can see when you read a book carefully and read it and read it and read it, you can see the pages get used, they get worn. And so we know, and he had notes in the books, so we can see that he got his ideas from the professors, and we know who they were. In Germany, Haeckel was one. Although he didn't rely totally upon Haeckel, of course, he relied upon many professors. And he didn't see what he was doing as any problem. And by the way, in many ways, Hitler was a fall guy. Hitler, as far as I know, didn't kill anybody. As far as I know, he didn't even go into the camps, as far as we know. Hitler got all of his ideas directly from, and we know who, from the professors. And one of Hitler's, I'm coming out with this in a new book, one of Hitler's favorite persons was Henry Ford, because Henry Ford believed in all these ideas, okay? Which is a fascinating story. In fact, in Mein Kampf, the only American he gave was Henry Ford. And when you walk into his office, he had Henry Ford's books there. And interesting, and this of course illustrates some of the concerns you have with this topic, but Henry Ford's best friend was a rabbi, and Henry Ford gave him a new car every year. And when the rabbi friend found out about Hitler's writings against Jews, called the International Jew, he wasn't too happy. And so when Ford sent him a car, he turned it down. Said, no, I can't accept this. A new car, a new Ford. And so, this is fascinating. Hitler went to his friend and said, we've been friends for many years. Did something come between us? And yeah, he didn't, he behaved to his friend, who's a Jew, very differently than he did in his writings. He didn't see his friend, a rabbi, hardly couldn't see him anything but a Jew. He didn't treat his friend like he treated in many of his books. And so he treated Jews in many of his books. And so Hitler was very inspired by Henry Ford's books. And I had a friend of mine who we worked together at the probation department in Royal Oak, and she wanted me to get something from her car. She was Jewish. And I said, what kind of car is it? Is it a Ford? And boy, she gave me a dirty look. And I didn't know what the issue was. And later on, when I read the International Jew and other, he did 4 volumes, by the way, which were very negative toward Jews. Okay, you can see drawings. We talked about Haeckel, and this is a female Hottentot, which is a very negative name for African, and then this is a female gorilla. Now, I've never seen an African, and I've been to Africa, that looked like the Hottentot. I've never seen a gorilla that looked like that. This is called artistic license, and we see that today. You see drawings of Lucy, the famous discovery, and if you look at her, she's got all her parts. And I asked one of the paleontologists involved with this, I says, we don't have evidence of her feet or her hands. In fact, we only have about 20% of her skeleton. That's all we found. And he said, well, artistic license, you got to fill in the blank parts. And I thought, that's a lot of artistic license. Pithecanthropus Alalus. Haeckel, the great German apostle of Darwinism, believed that man evolved from the apes, from a creature physically halfway between the two. Well, we know that. And he needed to draw that, and so here we go, artistic license. And there they drew the missing link that never existed, and there you can see what our link looks like. Based on the artist's conception, based on what Haeckel described the missing link as looking like. And I find it interesting that there's another artist that drew the same missing link, and if you look at that picture, same missing link, and I thought, gee, they couldn't be more different. But they were both the missing link, which was drawn from Haeckel's ideas of what it would look like. And you find a lot of evolution is based on what they call just so stories. This must have happened, and so therefore, well, we'll just speculate. And there you compare the two, and you can see that they're not even similar. But yet, artistic license. And facial angle theory, this is another idea, which they basically, you measure the forehead with a calipers, and basically you can determine how evolved they are. And this was a major idea not too long ago. And they basically concluded that their fish, the angle of the forehead is what? Almost horizontal. And as you move toward the lower races of man, it's still somewhat horizontal. When you go up to the highest race of man, it's almost vertical. Okay? Now you might say, well, that's interesting. But what they did and what they did in Germany was they measured this angle trying to figure out who the superior and inferior race was. Now that's one of many things that they did. They measured eye color, they measured the space between the pupils, they measured a lot of different traits, which today we see as not only foolish but silly, irresponsible. But this idea of the forehead measurement was critical in trying to determine what races were inferior and superior. And there's another example. So we evolved. And when I talked to people about this a few years ago, they said, well, the forehead the angle must have changed. Because we start out with a fish, look at the angle, and look at the modern man. So the angle tells us a lot. And the same thing here. I have a whole chapter in my book on this. And then ape to human evolutionary progression, we're still doing the same thing. The problem is most of these links are artist's conception. They don't exist. And in the original drawings, which were in a Time Life book, they explain fairly well that indeed this is theoretical, or this is based on a few bones, this is based on some inference, etc. And yet this is one of the most popular pictures of evolution. This is found everywhere. And I collect postage stamps, and I have about 100 stamps which picture the same thing on postage stamps throughout the world. And people see this. This creates very rapidly and quickly an image which people hold in their minds. So when you think about evolution, you're talking about, there you go. We got all the links. And when you mention, no, these are just artist conceptions, we don't have hardly any of these. In fact, we basically have not most of them even. And people say, well, must have them, because otherwise why would they make these drawings? And on chapter 13 I talk about this. And this is Haeckel's embryos. And this you all ought to be aware of. Christians, creationists, and others have really talked a lot about this. But basically what we have here is the early stages of the embryological development. They all look pretty similar. In the middle stages, they still look similar, and in the later stages, they look less and less similar. So we start out looking similar, and as we develop, we look less and less similar. And the idea is ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which means basically that we all repeat our evolutionary stages as we develop in the womb. And you might say, yeah, that's a silly idea, and it's been proven wrong, but didn't really have any effect. Have you ever heard of abortion? A University of Michigan professor, before the court, convinced the court, at least it seemed they did, convinced the court that when abortion occurs, we are not a human, we are a fish. And that's part of the legalese. If abortion were before the courts today, and it might be evidently, if abortion was before the courts today, I would hope they would not use that argument. And you pull that argument out, and you really have a hard time saying, at the early stages of development, we're not a human, we're a fish. Okay? And the biology book, looking at my grandson's biology book, they still present this idea. They say, well, it's been tweaked in the past few years, but still, basically, we go through our evolutionary history as we develop from the early stages of fish. And they even call parts of human embryo gills. And the human embryo does not have any gills. It's not there. And they call the other part gill slits. Well, you can call it a gill slit, but it's just an infolding. It's a pouch. It's where other organs develop. It's not gill slits, or it's not anything close. And you can see here, and this is from a fairly recent book, except I altered it a little bit there. You can see the coccyx is the tail. Okay, it's not a tail, it is the end of the spinal column. It's got to end somewhere. And it's a very important point of attachment for a number of muscles. And I cover that in my book on supposed poor design. And then the gill slits, again, are not gill slits. They're just pouches that are part of the development, which later on as we develop, the structure changes, and you don't see these, actually what looks more like hands, but anyways, it changes. And when you look at the development, you can see from the very early stages, there's enormous differences. And they become more similar in the middle stages. Okay? Haeckel ignored all the early stages. He just used the middle stages because, well, they're more similar. Even though he distorted the drawings to the point where they looked more similar in his drawings than they were. And then you can see as we develop that we become more and more dissimilar. One major area that the abortion issue has challenged in some ways is the sonograms. And in the sonogram, a number of clinics in our area, once you ask the mother if she wants a sonogram, just, you know, curiosity, and so they look at the sonogram. And now they've done a really good job in sonograms. They're very detailed, they're colorized, artificial color, but they're colorized. And so many women decide not to abort after looking at their baby in the womb. Because they can see it's a baby. There's several movies that came out. One is Gosnell, which they really did a good job. I was surprised. I thought I would be, you know, poor, but very, extremely well done, based totally on the case. And there's another one that came out recently about a young girl who worked. Unplanned. Was it? Unplanned. Unplanned. And I thought that was extremely well done. Accurate. For example, they showed after they do the abortion, they've got to count all the body parts to make sure they got it all. Wow. Okay, because otherwise they leave part of the body in the womb, and that's a problem. So somebody has to sit there and put them all together and make sure they got all the parts. And they went into accurate detail about how abortion is performed, etc. And they show a sonogram proceeding of an abortion. So that's excellent. So the mood of the country is swinging more and more against abortion, which is interesting. And there's Haeckel's embryos. You can see, I thought I had, okay, there you go, there's a picture. The top is his drawing, and the bottom is actually what they look like. Taken from, use the microscope, drawn by an artist who basically drew what they look like. He drew what they actually look like. So now you can see his drawings compared to the fact, and we can see it's not because he wasn't a good artist. It's because he deliberately distorted artistic license. And there you can see another picture of the same thing. Galton was Darwin's cousin, and Galton, his purpose of developing the fingerprint was primarily to further eugenic goals by identifying members of inferior and superior races by their fingerprints. And it's amazing when you study so many of these things 100 years ago, so much of it was done on the basis of trying to determine what races were inferior. And they thought if you looked at the fingerprints, maybe you could tell what races were inferior and superior by the fingerprints. And there we go, arch, loop, and whirl, and he developed all this. He wrote a whole book about this. But he realized towards the end that it doesn't work. You cannot tell certain races from others based on fingerprints. And so we have fingerprint science, which is valid today, but we found it's not true, what he discovered. The Ancon sheep was one of the best examples I'm aware of. The Ancon sheep was in all the textbooks for years until the 70s. And Darwin said the Ancon sheep is one of the best examples of evolution there is. And he said basically in Darwin's writings, he said, deny evolution? Right there, he got proof. One generation, we have a new species. Ancon sheep, the guy in the middle. A new species in one generation. How can you deny, and I had talked to students who repeat this same thing, how can you deny evolution? Then there you go. Evolution. Absolute proof. And that, again, was in the textbooks for almost a century. And Darwin first discussed this in 1859. And the sheep had very short legs. And this was an advantage only if you're concerned about keeping the sheep in the fold. Sheep are not like dogs. Dogs are herding animals. They stick together with their herd, the pack. But sheep do their own thing. They just kind of wander away. And so the sheep herder's job is to keep them together. So they wander off and end up lost, the lost sheep example. And the very short legs allowed them to build short fences, and therefore the sheep were kept within the fences, and it's cheaper to build a short fence than a high fence. And so that was the idea. And now we know that these were not a new breed. Okay, they were not a new breed. And by the way, he talked about this at least 4 times, Darwin did. They're not a new breed, but they are simply a deformed sheep. They have achondroplasia, and the sheep don't develop their legs properly because of the disease. Humans can get the same disease. And they found in the 30s, after doing dissections of the Ancon sheep, they were a mess. They had all kinds of health problems. They were not a new breed, they were a badly diseased sheep, and that's why they all died. We don't have any around today that I'm aware of. Or if we do, they're probably killed because they're diseased sheep. Peacock Fiasco, this is one that is still used. So many things Darwin could not explain. So many things he couldn't explain because they're not affected by survival. They don't improve the chance of survival. And so he basically said, well, this is sexual selection. So why do these peacocks have this incredible tail, which is nice, but try to escape enemies with that tail? Good luck. You're easy meat for snakes and all kinds of other critters. So how do you explain it? Because it doesn't help survival. It's not going to deal with survival. So, well, Darwin couldn't figure that out. So he came up with sexual selection. So he said the peahens select the peacocks based on their tail. And that has been repeated for years everywhere. Even creationists say, well, I believe in sexual selection. I mean, we have proof because the peacock. Well, somebody in Japan decided, let's do an experiment. Let's get the peacocks together and the peahens together, and let's see which animals, which peacocks they're attracted to, the peahens. And they found the tail had nothing to do with their attraction. They counted the spots, they counted the colors, they did photographic evaluations. They thought the larger tail, the more beautiful tail, etc., the peahens would be more attracted to them. But peahens didn't care at all. They didn't look at the tails at all. That was just totally irrelevant. And so many of these things which are supposedly selected because of sexual selection, turns out has nothing to do with their selection. Well, think of people. What things are males attracted to in women? Vice versa. What things are females attracted to in men? Now, there are some things, obviously. But, yeah, women like taller men as a whole. Men like women who are shorter as a whole. But there are many things that they look at. There's not one thing that is most important in human sexual attraction. Their whole person is important. There are many things that are important. And women tend to be attracted to things that are not related to physical attributes. Is that true? And so Darwin had a problem. How do you explain female attributes and male attributes, especially male attributes, when women, by and large, are not attracted to certain physical attributes of men? So how do you explain? That's what he was trying to explain, is physical attributes. So they really tried hard, and one thing they use now is musical talent. That a guy, if he can sing really well and play the guitar, he's going to get the lady. So that's where musical ability came from. That's where it came from, right? Musical ability. Well, then you tell me, why are 90% of the men musically illiterate? What happened? How many people? I took guitar lessons for 3 years. I think I learned one song, maybe. Okay, how many men are really talented with the guitar or the piano? How many of you guys can come up here and play this? Hey, all right. You guys will get the gals. The rest of us, too bad. We're stuck. We just don't have the. Now it's nice You know, it can certainly be help to meet a girl on a date, but on the other hand, when it comes down to it, it's not going to be that important. Okay, so sexual selection refuted. This was the study I mentioned. The peacock's tail feathers does not give it a mating advantage. And it would seem, I mean, they seem very attractive to us, but the peahen doesn't care. And you can see how that's a problem, walking around with that thing. Good luck escaping wolves. You're not going to do very well. And this is in an old textbook. And this was at the American Museum of Natural History. This was from a textbook I copied, a biology book. And you can see they've got them all lined up. And you can see we've got Cro-Magnon, the guy right at the top here, Neanderthals right there, and Piltdown Man, and I forget the last one. Okay. Last one was Java Man, I guess. But there they are. Well, Java Man we know is basically a forgery. Piltdown Man was a forgery. Neanderthals are our brothers and sisters. I had my DNA done by 23andMe, and I found I had 360 Neanderthal genes. A significant part of my genetic history besides Finnish. Finnish and German, and third was Neanderthal. So I'm a highly, my wife, she's had a great time. I knew it, she said. I knew it. You had to spend all that money to find out you're a Neanderthal. I knew it when I married you. So, and I've always been interested in Neanderthals for some reason, and I've done a number of articles. I'm doing a whole book on Neanderthals, and yeah, I'm proud to be a Neanderthal. So they're just another people group. They had a lot of talents. They were artists. They were artistic. They were very creative. They had a lot of creative traits, and so yeah. And then my wife always had an interest in Jews. Since we've been married, she's always read books about Jews and was very interested. She's very concerned about the Holocaust, and of course I'm interested in that as well. She's very concerned about the Jewish people in Israel and so on. She had her DNA done, and guess what? She's partly Ashkenazi Jew. And she was surprised and says, I knew there was Jewish blood there somewhere. Where did I get that interest from? Where did I get all these traits from? Well, there you go. That's where she got it from. Have your DNA done. By the way, a large number of people have significant amount of Neanderthal DNA. I happen to have more than 98% of the sample. So the sample of 5 million, I had more Neanderthal genes than 98%. So I'm at the top of Neanderthal. So, there. Or the bottom, yes. I guess if you don't like me, you could easily use that against me. But there's Piltdown Man, and you can see a lot of that's plaster of Paris. The white is actually bones, and the black is fill-in, plaster of Paris. Except it's painted black for some reason. But there's Piltdown Man. Piltdown Man, as you know, is a forgery. I have a chapter on that. A lot of stuff on Piltdown Man. Piltdown Man is the most famous forgery ever done in science, period. Whenever you read about forgeries in science, number one, they invariably mention Piltdown Man. It's the most famous forgery. And yet, if you read books about Piltdown Man and chapters, we knew all about his family, his habits, what he liked, what he didn't like. We have page after page of all the nuances of Piltdown Man. And now when you read that, you look at that and say, boy, people just really made up a lot of stuff. Because it's obviously all untrue. And this was used for decades. In fact, I have a book printed in the 60s which still used the Piltdown Man. It's all pretty much out of the books now, but nonetheless it was used for quite a few years. And now we know where these pieces came from. And there you can see they're digging him up. One thing that bothered me was this area is not very good to preserve fossils. It's wet, it rains every year. Fossils are preserved in dry areas, deserts, in Africa where it's desert, because water deteriorates fossils, bones. They don't last very long at all. And so to me, that's one indication that there's a problem. How did all of the leading, or most I should say, leading scientists, how in the world did they accept this when it's obvious to me when I look at that, you're not going to get preservation in those conditions. Very poor preservation, if any at all. And there, Java Man, you can see, we built a whole man from these parts here. And now we know that the leg bones here, the femur is part of a human, and the skull bone is part of the skull top, and the teeth are part of an ape. Okay? And this is a picture from a textbook. And you can see we start out with Java Man, Pithecanthropus erectus, Java, Neanderthal, Negroid man, Nebraska glacial man, and there you go, there's evolution. And I just wonder how many students looked at that. I did. I remember when I took my paleoanthropology course, I looked at all these skulls and I thought, you can't deny it, it's there. How can you deny these skulls? Obviously, evolution of man is true. And that convinced me in college to accept evolution. Right there's the evidence. You have to be blind not to see it. Obviously, it's true. And you can see, now this book was published in the 30s, I believe, and you can see how many people were convinced to accept the Darwinian worldview based on what we know now as fraudulent evidence. And there you can see the actual fossils of Piltdown. And we have another case, Confucius Sornius, and that again was a forgery. And that, fortunately, it didn't take long to prove it was a forgery, but it was not only a forgery, but a bad forgery. And National Geographic did an article on this, and they had information that was a forgery, but yet they did the article anyways. And a lot of these, by the way, these forgeries come out of China. And there are a number of these examples which I question whether or not they're really true. And Archaeoraptor forgery, another example. And there you can see Archaeoraptor fossil forgeries in the National Geographic. And there you can see another picture from National Geographic. And there you can see a drawing of what it's supposed to look like. And there's another example. The problem of fraud in society, it's a, quote, a serious, deeply rooted problem that affects no small number of contemporary scientific research studies, especially in the field of evolution. And I should add, especially in the field of medicine. Of all places where forgery should not be is in medicine. Why? I don't know if any of you have worked for medical school, but I have. And a lot of professors there, they don't get paid by the medical school. They get grants. And their salary comes from the grant. Well, if you don't get good results, your grant's not renewed. And so it's a matter of, can you feed your family? Or, hey, we'll just tweak the results a little bit. We'll just pull out a few pieces of data. We'll get close to the actual results, but not there. We'll get the results so they look promising. So we'll get my grant, and then I'll be here at the university for another year or two or three, get a 3-year grant if I can, and I can take care of my family. I don't have to worry about moving, taking the kids out of school. So there's a strong incentive today for forgery in science. And so therefore there's an epidemic of forgery in science, and in medicine especially. And one reason researchers are fooled, you tend to see what we want to see. The propensity for self-delusion is strong, especially when examining ideas and data that impinge on their core belief structure. We tend to see what we want to see. When I talk about this issue with students and so on, I mention the vast majority of mutations are negative or near neutral. How are you going to get evolution to people? You can't do it. Well, we'll figure it out. It's so very hard to convince them that it just doesn't work. It's overwhelming evidence. I have to wonder, are people really rational who believe in evolution? I got my license and worked for Arlington Psychological Associates doing therapy. And some of my patients were healthier than many of the evolutionists I know. You know, it's denial. And you present this evidence to them and you show them the data. Yeah, I know vast majority of mutations are harmful or near neutral and natural select. You talk about this and yeah, it's a problem, but we'll figure it out. Just takes a while. Hey, Darwin lived only 150 years ago. Give us time. Well, what is the explanation? Well, I don't know, but we're working on it. And it's so hard. I was able to convince my paranoid schizophrenics. Easy, it's hard to convince paranoid schizophrenics, but I worked on a couple of patients I was successful with. They're hard to convinced, but I was able to convince them more effectively than some evolutionists. So I really wonder, are they okay? It's a delusion. Okay, research the so-called fact of evolution. People ask me, gee, how do you help people overcome this delusion? Read, 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 read. And I have a whole book coming out called Science is the Doorway to Theism. And I have 50-some cases of scientists who are atheists who became theists by studying science. How can you not believe in a God when you study science? I mean, it's all around us. And that was important for me, and that's why I wrote that book. Because, as I said, I was an atheist, and people asked me how I became a Christian. Well, I didn't have a Pauline on the way to Damascus experience. I just studied science, read it, so I have 9 degrees. I just kept on going. And as you study science, you realize there has to be a designer. I taught anatomy at the medical school. And you realize there has to be a designer. And one example is a student. We were talking about why trees lose their leaves, why deciduous trees lose their leaves. And I mentioned because of snow. They lose their leaves, so it snows, they don't fall over. And he thought about that, and they lose their leaves in, what, October, November, the end of November, it starts to snow. How do they know it's going to snow? Do they talk to each other? Winter's coming. You better start losing your leaves. You're going to end up on the ground. And the student thought, I didn't say anything, I just explained why they lose their leaves. And the student raised his hand and said, there must be a God. And you can see that he thought about it. He was a good student. He was an A student, very bright student. And he thought about that, and how do they know? What signs do they have? And if they didn't lose their leaves in cold areas like we have, they'd all be on the ground and dead. So they had to lose their leaves first before the snow came. And which is usually what happens. If the snow comes too early, sometimes we have a problem. But he thought about that. And when you study so much of how the body is designed. I remember I took toxicology at the medical school, and the professor, Bob Forney, was a creationist. I knew that, so I took him purposely. And he never mentioned creationism in class, but as I studied this thick book, it just was amazing. The biochemical system, that was my major for my master's degree, was biochemistry. It's amazing the complexity of this system, how well it works. And one thing you learn when you study medicine is, gee, there's a bazillion things that could go wrong with me. It's amazing I got up and I made it through the day with everything going right. And so when you study medicine, you realize there's so much that can go wrong. And yet it doesn't, because there's so many safe systems that prevent it from going wrong. And there's so many systems which are failback systems. It's like how you design elevators. You might not know, but when I taught engineering too. And when you talk about engineering, how do they know how to build an elevator? Well, they get as many people as they can. They pack it into the elevator, they weigh it, and they find it weighs 8,000 pounds, and they multiply that by 3 or 5. That's the safety factor. And so if they find it holds, 10,000 pounds, then they build it so it withstands 30,000 pounds. Well, that's the same way your body is. It's designed to receive more stress than you're likely going to give it. Although some people manage to give it the stress that it fails. But on the other hand, I think about my life and the things I've done. When I built furniture when I was out of high school. And I was lazy. And I built a whole office full of furniture, and I crated it up in one big box. And that must have weighed 4,000 pounds. And we had like 8 of us that lifted that up. And I remember to this day my back hurting. I'm amazed, the doctor's amazed that I can walk around with all my discs pretty much in place. Because how could you lift that much weight and still, well, that's true with so many things. And the same thing with hearing. I remember when I worked in the furniture factory again. We had a saw that cut round beams, a steel saw. And that noise you could hear throughout the whole plant. And I remember my ears hurting when that saw went across that tube. It amplified the sound. And yet I can still hear. And when I went in medical school, I took a course in hearing. And I tested myself, and my hearing's still pretty good. How in the world could that hearing was painful, and yet I can still hear. But of course, from that course, became aware of the fact that a lot of us, they work in a factory for 30 years without hearing protection, and no wonder they go deaf. So now we have protection that's required. So. No, go ahead.
That many fields of science are fraudulent by the way they hold to a given idea they're committed to, like global climate change, which is entirely fraudulent. And I know about some of the data practices they use to keep it that way. They get false results.
Yeah, that's a problem in that area. The climate has increased, by the way, since 1880. I taught this, geology. Since 1880, it's increased by 0.8 degrees. And the concern is it may increase by another 1 to 2 degrees. So I think 1 degree is what has increased in the past few years. And it may go up to 2 degrees, and some speculate it may go up to 6 degrees. And so you're right, there's a lot of, they're promising basically as, what, Cortez, I forget her name, but she says the end of the world in a few years. So, but I think we should be good with the resources. I think we should take care of the resources on the earth. If you realize in the natural world, everything is recycled. In the natural world, nothing is not recycled. Everything, always recycled everywhere in the natural world. And I think we're making a mistake in not recycling things. We end up with tons and tons and tons of trash. The highest point in many cities is a landfill. Literally, the highest point in the city is the landfill. And all that should be recycled, and I think that's a mistake, but that's my ecological pressure. Okay, go ahead.
Well, you said this, that your boxes that you sent got lost in the mail?
They're supposed to be in St. Cloud Post Office somewhere.
Because they haven't evolved far enough yet.
Well, I just wonder, but one of them made it. And that was there after a week, and then it's been 3 weeks since then, and somehow they haven't made it. So hopefully they'll, because I had this happen 3 times, so I'm not going to send anything by the post office, the books anymore. Because I sell them for my cost, so I'm losing too much money. Go ahead.
Do you incorporate in your studies any of the facts of pre-flood and the fact that humans lived to be a lot longer and the effects of the flood?
I've looked at that, but John Sanford and others have looked a lot more detail. But I tend to focus on the here and the now. I'm really the only one that looks at the harm evolution has done in society. There's no other creationist that I know that really looks at that in detail. And I do well. I get a lot of speaking engagements, and my books do fairly well. And I should have this year 10 books come out. 3 are out, and I should have 7 more. 3 are almost out, and I could easily write 10 more. There's so many areas where evolution has really messed up society. You look at almost every problem in our society today, you can trace it back in one way or another to evolution. The racism problem traces right back to evolution. And I'm working on a book on that now. The ecological problem, all these problems, to some degree, trace back to evolution.
You said that you had a book coming out for 50 atheists.
Right. Science is the doorway to atheism. And then I have another book called Evolution is the doorway, Science is the doorway to theism. Sorry, the publishers they've changed the title 4 times, so I'm confused. Well, the title of my own book is. But the other one is Evolution is the doorway to atheism. And I have 50 cases, well-known people, most of them are very well-known, who were Christians, claimed to be active Christians and became atheists. Karl Marx is one. Stalin is another. Hitler is another. Darwin is another. So there's a lot of well-known people that have taken the journey from evolution to atheism. Go ahead.
So it's good to know that racism didn't exist before 1859. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, well.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, yeah, thank you. Gould said racism existed before 1859, but increased by orders of magnitude after 1859. Oh yeah, I'm getting back to 1700 where racism existed, which I'm looking at. Lamarck was racist, And several of the pioneers of evolution were racist. So yeah, thank you for bringing that out. No, it just increased by orders of magnitude, and Gould said that, so I guess I can quote him. So thank you for bringing that out. So, by the way, problems exist all the way back to Adam and Eve, so we're just saying they became a lot worse as a result of evolution. Go ahead.
Earlier you were talking about beneficial mutations. Now there are a few mutations that are beneficial, but I was kind of wondering if for the audience if you could just kind of like to mention, we know like for instance antibiotic resistance where the side effect might be beneficial, but ultimately you're destroying stuff as opposed to creating stuff. So
Right.
I'm wondering if you could like share with us like some examples of mutations that while they might be beneficial, when you take a look at them in information standpoint, they're actually,
Right.
not creating the types of genetic
Yeah,
changes.
I have a whole hour lecture on that, so it's kind of hard to repeat it. But yeah, there are a few that are beneficial in some situations, like seedless fruit is beneficial for us, but not for the fruit. And as you mentioned here, the mutations that occur in bacteria give them an advantage in a situation with lots of antibiotics, but they don't have an advantage in the normal population of bacteria. So that's a good point. But hey, invite me back and I'll do that lecture. That's one of my most popular lectures, by the way, because that's the heart of evolution. If you deal with a mutation issue, evolution's dead. Natural selection is nothing to select from.
Would you say that the changing angle of the sun is responsible for the leaves on trees going away before the snow comes?
Yeah, there are a number of things they utilize. Ironically, we don't know for sure why. Like we still don't know how birds know where to go in the winter, how they get to, there's a lot of theories, magnetism and so on, but seems to be complex. Probably that's part of it. The getting cooler is probably part of it, but it's a number of things because any one of these things doesn't seem to change it. How do we know this cause the leaves to fall, deciduous trees? We know that because you put them in artificial environments and you manipulate this, and then you can determine what indeed is causing the trees to lose their leaves. And it turns out there's many things that as a set that causes them to lose their leaves, which is good because otherwise we have a cold day and they start to lose their leaves. That would be a problem if we had a cold day in July. So fortunately they use a number of criteria to make the decision. Go ahead. That would be what's his name? Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking, yeah. Interesting person, and his wife, very devout creationist. She was a Church of England, which aren't always, but it's interesting being married, that combination. Of course, they eventually divorced. Actually, they divorced, believe it or not, through Stephen Hawking's promiscuity. Was a major factor. And talk about sexual selection. I don't know, are you gals attracted to someone like that? His wife, Jane, by the way, mentioned that taking care of Stephen is like taking care of a late-stage Auschwitz victim. And it really became difficult after a while in their marriage. But she would be with him if he wasn't promiscuous, but he started flirting after other women, his nurse, etc. So she couldn't deal with that. So eventually they split. And she has a book she wrote all about their life. Did a really, really good job talking about the world of high-level scientists. And she had a hard time stomaching them. She found so many were arrogant, so many were not concerned about real-life people and things. And they were concerned about their reputation, very concerned about their reputation and being a great scientist. And she had a hard time dealing with all that. They weren't very human people. And she does a good job detailing that in her book. Go ahead.
You mentioned there is no evidence for Lucy's feet. Technically, that's not correct. Lucy, the specimen called Lucy, had no feet that were found.
Oh, yeah.
Is Lucy the only specimen of Australopithecus apparatus?
Right. What they did is they got other specimens of Australopithecus and they basically assumed those feet belonged to Lucy. And the same thing with the hands.
No, they did not assume that.
They what? Go ahead.
They never found Lucy's feet.
Right.
But they found other specimens of that particular species.
Right, which they assume would be the same as Lucy's.
They're assuming that she had feet.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's a pretty good assumption. I'm okay on that. Yeah. But whether the feet they found belong to Lucy specifically, the evidence isn't quite there. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I would assume she had feet, probably. That's a good assumption. assumption, but some of the other assumptions would be, but they imply, and we had it in Detroit, we had a little Lucy skeleton there, and I was with one of the paleoanthropologists, and I said, isn't that an artistic license to the statue they had there with nice feet that looked like your and mine feet? And he says, yeah, but that's artistic license. We're sure they must have had feet that look like this, so we used. But the skeleton they had there they claim it's 40% complete, but actually if you weigh the bones, it's closer to 20% complete. But when you're looking at the model there, you're assuming all these came specifically from Lucy. In fact, they're not sure if it was a female, so they call it Lucy because Lucy in the Sky was plain when, of course, the Johansen found it, and so that's as good a name as any for Lucy.
So what could we say to fellow believers who say God created through evolution?
Yeah, that's the most common comment I get, because people commonly believe that because I can believe both science and the Bible. The problem is neither science nor the Bible teaches theistic evolution. And the problem is, let's prove evolution first, then let's try to harmonize it with the Bible. And the problem is, clearly, evolution is the doorway to atheism. And when I was an atheist, we talked so much about evolution and not much about much else. Well, besides converting America to, atheism. But I wondered, why do we spend so much time talking about evolution? Our journal, and I wrote for the journals. Mallory Murray O'Hara, you might have known her. She liked me. We had a good relationship, and she published everything I wrote, which I was flattered with. But you wonder why I wondered why we pushed evolution so much. They said because evolution is the doorway to atheism. You want to help people become atheists? The easiest way is convince them to become evolutionists. And chances are pretty good they'll become, or at least some of them will become atheists. And that was the goal, of course, of atheists. They're very active in proselytizing their worldview. And so that was what they wanted to do. Go ahead.
I was wondering if you could explain, were you released from a university for some discrimination reason?
Yeah, I was at Bowling Green State University for 7 years, and in writing I had a dozen signed notarized affidavits stating the reason I was let go was because of my religious convictions relative to this issue. I had page after page after page of information relative to my religion. And I went all the way up to the appellate court. And what they did, this shows you what happens in these. I have one book here, but I have 5 volumes now in that area. This shows you what they do. They got my vita, and on my vita, I claimed to publish an article in a journal, a book by Forrest Dodge, Dr. Dodge. And they got a copy of that book, and they showed it at a faculty meeting, and here's Bergman's vita. He says he published this article in this book. Here's the book. The article's not in there. He lied. Now, I didn't know this until we filed a lawsuit. And he convinced, Richard Burke specifically, convinced the faculty that I was lying because I claimed this article was in the book. Here's the book. See, there's the book. The article's not in there. Well, my article was in the new edition. And they got away with this because it's a closed meeting, and they walked away convinced that I had ethical problems. I was claiming an article I didn't write in this book by Dr. Dodge. And if they would tell me they should, before they make this accusation, I think they knew what they were doing. They should say, now this is your vita, it says this, and here's the book, it's not in there. Oh, you got the wrong edition. Oh, okay. Very simple. But they didn't do that. I think they didn't do that because they wanted to get me fired. And I had a lot of support there. I had probably, the area I taught in, I had unanimous support. But when it got to that meeting and that book and a few other things, and I couldn't respond to it, and I was very disappointed that a university would play such games. And this, in the cases I have in here and in my other 2 books, this is what they do. They don't have a good reason to let someone go. I was the most productive faculty at Bowling Green. I had merit raises all over the place. I was making more money than most of the professors who were there longer because I was doing the work. I was publishing a textbook. I published a monograph by Phi Delta Kappa. I had lots of articles published. I had good student ratings. I started Friends of the Library there. I did all these good things, and yet I didn't get tenure because they claimed that I was lying about my credentials. Well, I never had a chance to respond to that. And once I found out about that, it was too late. So, and that's what they do over and over and over. And my guess is they spent hours and hours looking for something they could attack me with, and they found something, and I never had a chance to respond to it. So that's what happened.
And the reality of governments around the world. That's how the governments of the world work. They do good things, and they believe they're lying.
Yeah, there seems to be some feeling that maybe the Trump situation with Russia maybe all wrong, and I guess now they're investigating the other side, and it seems, I don't know, but seems that indeed somebody else may be in trouble for that. So I don't know, but any other? Oh, over here quickly, go ahead.
You were talking about the deleterious effect of evolution, the paradigm of evolution today. Can you give us a specific example today as how this evolutionary paradigm is impeding the progress of scientific research today?
Because instead of explaining things for science, they say evolution did it. I'm reading a book now on sound, and over they say evolution did this. The mouse, the aegis, and the stapes in the ear, it has a volume control. Evolution did this. Why can we hear within 20 and 20,000 hertz? Evolution did it. Because that's where most of our conversation goes. So evolution evolved us so we could hear the area that most of our speech is in that range. So they explain so many things. I got it on tape, but I'm going to buy the book and I'm going to find out how many times they explain things by evolution. They should say, we don't know how this works out. Or, well, just the way it is. Understand the way it is. You don't have to mention God did it, but they say over and over and over, evolution planned ahead. Evolution knew that we would need to hear within this range. So evolution made us evolve so that we hear in the 20 to 20,000 range. Because most of our hearing is in what, 30,000 or 20 to 20,000. So I think it's what, 8,000 to 10,000? So that's the range that they... So over and over, and just in this one book on sound. And they do this throughout the book.
You had mentioned seedless fruit is beneficial to us, but not beneficial to the fruit. What do you mean by not beneficial?
Well, because the fruit can't reproduce. It doesn't have any seeds. That's the end of that guy. No offspring for him. So yeah, and that's true with a lot of these things. It benefits us, but not the animal. Not, in this case, the fruit. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Of your 90 degrees, how many did it take before you switched from evolutionary atheists to
Oh, probably working on the first doctorate, I think. It was a gradual. What I find in my books, it tends to be a gradual process. Again, I didn't have a Pauline conversion experience. Some people do. I have talked to people that one day they're an atheist and the next day they're a creationist. But that, my experience, what's your experience? That's kind of rare. What's your experience? How many see that's kind of rare? Raise your hand. Quite a few people. Yeah, so it's a gradual process. But becoming an evolutionist is a gradual process. That's why now in America they're starting with first grade. We'll start with first grade, we'll just introduce the ideas, and by the time they get to high school level, they'll be convinced evolutionists. And they cover evolution in first grade now in many of the schools. So we'll get them there, just slowly but surely. There are books out there, how to convince the students that evolution is how we got here. And they talk about these steps. Go ahead.
Do you find that evolution could be blamed for the basic scientific illiteracy of the population?
Somewhat, I think, because a lot of students, bright students, I know many, you probably know some, they get this evolution rammed down their throat and they drop science and they major in music. Yes. And I think we lose so many capable scientists. Even some, I've known some, they get their PhD and they just can't do science because it's saturated with evolution. So they go into some other area. And so I think a lot of bright students we lose because they're turned off by the evolution. And some professors, I've had not many, but some professors are really aggressive. I'll give you one example. One class, a student told me this because he switched schools and I asked why. And he said, well, first day we walked into class, she said, biology class, she said, how many of you are creationists or doubt evolution? Raise your hand. So 4 or 5 people raised their hand. Some people just sat there and wondered what's going on. So 4 or 5 people raised their hand. So then she said, could you 5 please stand up? So they stood up. She said, you're going to flunk this class. I strongly recommend you leave now. And they left. And so, and a student told me this. She told me this because this is why she left that school and came to my school. And so now that's pretty brazen. But on the other hand, it's not. I had a professor, my genetics professor, basically said the same thing, except he didn't say you'll flunk, he said you might flunk. So I stayed in the class and I got a B, so probably could have gotten, it's genetics, probably could have gotten an A, but I questioned his belief. And
So I'm curious, if you started as an atheist and through science you came to creationism, did it matter to you which theism you chose? How did you zero in on Christianity?
Well, I looked at, my PowerPoint covers that, but I looked at the number of religions and I looked at quite a few. And I realized the one that's closest to reality is Christianity.
What did you compare?
Oh, I compared,
How did you make the determination?
oh, I looked at Mormonism, I look at Christian Science, I know they're kind of far off, but I looked at so many of the other Buddhism and Confucianism, and Confucianism is a lot of good sayings. It's not really a worldview. Christianity really has no, Christianity, Judaism, and the Muslim faith really have no competition in the world. There are no religious beliefs that answer the same thing that those people of the book religions answer. They tell us where we came from, where we're going, our purpose in life. They all answer the same things. And most religions don't answer, the so-called religions don't answer those basic things. And Christianity does. So the choice is between Christianity, Judaism, and Judaism is really, we're Jews. We're all Jews. We just took the next step. We just accepted the Messiah, who was a Jew that made good. And so, you know, we basically are Jews. In fact, in my church, we celebrate so many of the Jewish holidays. We have, and many of the churches do, we have Seder meals, we celebrate, we just went over all the Jewish holidays, the Feast of Temples. We studied all these things, and we're Jews, we just went the next step. We had the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, we have the New Covenant. We just went beyond Judaism. But we still, in fact, right now in my Sunday school, we're studying Dennis Prager's book on Exodus, and we're going to do Genesis next. Excellent job, and does a really good job. And he basically is a Christian, except he just can't accept, he has to believe, he can't accept, well, not so much Christ, but he just can't accept the idea that we can get to heaven by being born again. He is very much into work salvation. We've got to do things good to be saved. And that's the main problem he has with Christianity. But otherwise, it's really, and Muslim faith, I went to a lecture once, walk in late, don't walk in late, and the guy was finished, and after the lecture, I started talking to him. I talked to him for 20 minutes before I realized he was a Muslim. He was talking all about Christianity and Protestant, talking about Protestantism mostly. And he read the Protestant Bible, he read the Old Testament, the New Testament. He says, we believe in the Old Testament and New Testament. We just realize there are errors in the Old New Testament. So we updated it with the Quran. And so that's his. So yeah, I find that's interesting. And it just surprised me that I thought I was talking to a Protestant minister. It surprised me after, 15 minutes, that and then I realized that he's not a Protestant minister, he's a Muslim. And so they are really very close in so many ways. But of course, we don't worship the moon god. A few differences, and it didn't take me long to realize that historically, there's problems with the Muslim faith historically. And if you read the science in the Quran, it's not nearly the problem you have with the science in the Bible. Other back here?
Is there any correlation between people that have had their appendixes out? I saw your book, Useless Organs, and it would show that it would have been better. Have they done?
Oh yeah, now the medical practice is you don't remove the appendix unless you absolutely have to. If it's inflamed, if it's going to burst and fill the whole abdominal cavity with bacteria, you got to remove it. But that same... Oh, if you have the appendix out, you're more likely to suffer from a number of diseases. There's like 5 or 6 diseases that you're more likely to suffer from when you have an appendectomy. such as various levels of inflammation, such as the appendix is a backup organ. If you lose your spleen, the appendix will take over. And so therefore, if you don't have an appendix, you're having to take over the loss of function from the spleen, because if you lose it through car accident or whatever. So yeah, there's quite a few. There's so many I can't.
That's what's in that book.
Oh yeah, I cover that in detail. And I review the literature. Same thing is true with the wisdom teeth. The same thing is true with the tonsils. They did a study in Denmark. They compared those who had tonsillectomies and those who didn't. Because Denmark has a universal health system. Everybody's part of it. So they got the records of everybody, and they compared those with tonsillectomies with those who didn't, and they found a huge difference. That those with tonsillectomies had all kinds of more problems. They're more likely to have a number of throat problems, of sleep apnea, which I thought they took tonsils out because of sleep apnea. Well, they're more likely to have sleep apnea, a bunch of problems. And it's clear the difference. And so therefore, hopefully, doctors will be aware of that, and they will, again, tonsillectomy, last resort. Tonsillectomy for me was the first resort. I was 5 years old. The doctor said you had them out, and I said, well, no, let's get them out. And I said, why? Because you better have them out when you're younger. It's better. But is there any reason? No, they don't serve a function. They just cause problems. They help doctors buy a Rolls Royce. So we got to get them out, and I had them out for no reason, and I suffer from all kinds of problems because I had a tonsillectomy. Well, now, not everybody will suffer from that, but they did the comparison with, I forget, like 5 million people, and I have the study in my book.
Okay, one more.
One more, okay.
Over, we have a zoo over here called the Como Zoo, and I actually saw that by the orangutan exhibit, they make the claim that we share 97% DNA similarity with orangutans. We've heard about, I've heard about chimp DNA, but could you just respond specifically to the claim that 97% of orangutan DNA is similar to humans?
Well, no, it's closer to 85%. And people think you just sequence the genes, you line them up, and you make the comparison. It's not that simple. I worked in a genetics lab. I did this work. What they do is they take the genome, they chop it up in a million, I don't know how many, but a million pieces, and then they put it together. And when they put it together, they need a framework. And the framework to put the chimp pieces together is a human framework. Well, right away you've got a bias. And they got all these genes, all these DNA sequences, there's nothing to compare with, so they throw it out. So they throw out huge pieces of DNA because there's nothing that they can compare it with. How do you compare a French word with a Russian word? There's in many ways there's no comparisons. You're trying to compare things that are not comparable. And so you just throw it out. They compare what they can compare, and that's what they've done. And that's how they get these high numbers. But as they do more and more sequencing, they're realizing that it's not 98. In fact, that's been well debunked a decade ago.
Yeah, it's still on display at the Como Zoo.
Yeah,
Typical.
you ought to mention that to them. So. Thank you much.